Okay, I guess, so we have a quorum, and Debbie, am I right that Commissioner Boyd and Barole are on by phone only?
I see Commissioner Boyd, yes, and it appears Commissioner Barole is also joining by computer as well.
Okay.
And
Helene,
Commissioner Adekoya is here.
Helene was here. Guess maybe I just can't see everyone. It's the problem. There's Commissioner Boyd. Okay, all right, so let's call the meeting to order. I hope everyone had a good holiday season and that everyone has stayed relatively healthy and everybody's in good shape right now. I know that I'm certain that all of you were as surprised as I was to learn of Commissioner Jackson's death. None of us had any idea how seriously ill she was. And so I'd ask that we just take a quiet moment of reflection or prayer just to remember her and to keep her family in our thoughts. So this is a good reminder to all of us not to be overly somber about things, about how fragile life is, and the importance of just cherishing each day that we have and cherishing all of our loved ones and all of our colleagues, and try to make the most of every day that is presented to us. So Secretary Fielder, any comments that you'd like to make?
I'd like to welcome everybody to a new year, even though we're almost at the end of the first month, and to recognize that this is the time of year for MHEC and the legislature to be in session for budget hearings and audit findings and all those wonderful things. A couple quick things just for everybody to reflect upon. In these past 7, almost 8 years now, what we've been able to achieve at MHEC through the state plan of increasing access, success, and innovation. Who would have thought when you look back that we've supported 1.1 billion, that's with a B, $1 billion worth of scholarships, tax credits, and program awards. And that's just phenomenal. 750 new academic programs. So we've seen an increase in minority participation across the board. We've seen increases in graduation rates and matriculation rates. And the neat part, if there is one, of this last 24 months of COVID, the tremendous increase in cooperation and collaboration that we're seeing among institutions, especially with the fact that we're relying on the departments of health, even the state police and commerce and labor involved in COVID responses. So all these things I can look at with a positive aspect of what we've been able to do. And we'll be continuing to report on this over the next 6 weeks in Annapolis. So that would be all my comments.
Thank you, Secretary Fielder. All good news and important things for us to keep in mind in terms of the impact and influence that this commission and the work of the entire staff has on higher education, post-secondary education. There are no public comments today, and so I'd like a motion to approve our minutes from December 15th.
So moved.
And a second, please. Thank you, Commissioner Serrano. And are there any amendments, additions, corrections from anybody? All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye or raise your hand, whichever is easier.
Aye.
Thank you. So the minutes are approved. Next on the agenda are the committee updates. And Commissioner Boyd, if we could start with your committee, education policy.
Actually, there's nothing to report on the Educational Policy Committee at this point, save that we changed our meeting time to maybe every other month as opposed to once a month.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Commissioner Boyd? And let me move to Commissioner Coleman. Is there a report from Outreach Grants and Financial Assistance?
Yes, a brief report. First, I would like to acknowledge again Commissioner Jackson. I got to know her because I was a seatmate. I didn't get to know her personally, but just a seatmate when I first came on the board. She kind of helped me, guide me through all the papers and the agenda and things. And then she asked me to join the outreach committee, which I did. And I went to her service. And at her service, everyone spoke of her in such a kind of way. She was a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. And the community loved her and appreciated her a lot. And I can see why she probably joined this outreach program, because everybody that gave remarks talked about how much she was able to, she helped so many people and participated in so many things to help others. And she cares so much about others. The communication grants and outreach, a few updates on them. MHAC Communication Office is working with counterparts at MSDE on outreach engagements and coordinated their efforts to ensure better outcomes when promoting scholarships and grants available to high school students all over the state of Maryland. MHAC also continued to work with the Family Support Center of Anne Arundel County Department of Social Service to provide GED students information on how to fill out the financial aid application, especially for the students that are applying for scholarships and grants. These are for the undocumented immigrants that are eligible. The grant unit is working with the Baltimore Orioles regarding an upcoming college fair that will be at the park, and they are still in the planning stage of that. The social media and web page are focusing on completing the state application for a mid-cap account to be notified with state financial aid for students. They are completing the application for that. And then I'm going to ask Commissioner Alacuti, because she has several questions and information that she would like to share, and I'm going to ask her to do that.
Good, thank you. Commissioner Adekoya?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I was interested in knowing regarding how we can really expand outreach, and being a Gen Zer, and of course, technology, phones, applications. Something I was definitely interested in knowing is if MHAC has ever considered creating an app to showcase all of the scholarships and grants at the tip of all of our fingers, which I think would be a great resource. And it was brought to my attention that MHAC had researched creating an app in the past, and Secretary Fielder himself was a huge supporter. However, there's never been money in the budget to move forward with this app coming to fruition. So as a committee, I do want us to still consider and discuss what that app would look like, explore creative options, and also the funding for the creative tool. When I started thinking about this, I was thinking about even roping in students. We know that technology is a booming industry. Students as young as my little brother, who's 12, knows how to create an app. And if there was even some way to create a project where we work with the creativity and mindset of our own students to offset such app, and if asked, the app is, oh, okay, the app would cost money, but if we discussed it, we could ideally push forth for the budgeting for said app.
So it sounds as though this is something that the committee would take up for further discussion. Is that what's planned?
That's my hope.
So, okay. Then Secretary Fielder, anything that you want to add to that?
Not at this time, yes.
Okay, all right, thanks. Commissioner Coleman, thank you for that reflection about Commissioner Jackson. It was very helpful to get a feeling about the service that was held in her honor. So, that's lovely. That's lovely. Does anybody have any questions for Commissioner Coleman? Okay, so then let's move on to Finance and Operations Committee. Mr. Newman, is there any report from the committee?
No report from the committee, but I could just say that MHEC is now going through we're beginning our budget hearings through the General Assembly starting tomorrow with the higher education overview. The governor was very generous with funding to higher education this year, giving good increases to the public four-year institutions, which in turn provides increases to the community colleges and the Sellinger institutions, as well as funding increases to several of our state scholarship programs, and funding for 5 of the 10 new PINs that we need to add to the agency in anticipation of the new academic program review process as a result of the HBCU settlement. So we are anticipating a lot of work in the near future for MHEC to start getting ready for all these new actions beginning in July. We have filled a couple more of our PINs. We're still working on completing, getting all the PINs that we currently have filled. We've hired a couple of administrative support people recently, so we're probably have about 4 or 5 additional PINs to fill in the near future.
Great, thank you very much. And that's great news about the budget for both the four-year public community colleges and the independent colleges. So that's all good news, and it sounds like you're making good progress on filling positions. And Secretary Fielder, did you have your hand up?
Yes, one of the highlights Jeff just mentioned was the increase in scholarship programs. It's a quadrupling of the money that we have for teacher scholarships, which is phenomenal.
That's
At
great.
a time when we know there's a shortage of teachers across the state.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly resignations and retirements are happening in that field. So clearly a need to do some backfilling. So great. Any questions for Mr. Newman? Okay, all right, thank you. And then finally, Commissioner McDaniels, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The DEI committee did meet on January 10th. The main focus of this most recent meeting was to develop suggestions for Secretary Fielder to be considered for inclusion in the 2022 guidelines that are sent out to institutions for reporting on diversity and culture, progress to 55, and best practices. We did receive good input from the committee members of our committee, and those suggestions are being compiled by staff and will be forwarded to Dr. Dow and Secretary Fielder, and we were really pleased to have that opportunity to just provide those suggestions.
Great, that's terrific. And any questions for Commissioner McDaniels? Okay, thank you all for those committee reports. And Mr. Newman, I think we're coming back to you to introduce Mr. Schuster for the report on the Community College Construction Grant Program.
Yes, Mr. Dan Schuster, who administers our Community College Construction Grant Program and is responsible for oversight of all capital budgets and projects for higher education for MHEC, is going to be discussing very quickly the state and local cost sharing formula and contributions for the Community College Construction Grant Program for fiscal 2024. So Dan, please proceed.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the commission. For the record, Dan Schuster, Capital Finance Analyst here at MHEC. And as Jeff mentioned, I just have this one informational item to present to you today related to the cost sharing formula for the Community College Construction Grant Program. And as you know, that grant program is the vehicle through which the state provides funding for capital projects at our community colleges. So we're talking about projects to build new facilities or do extensive renovations to existing facilities or infrastructure improvements, that sort of thing. And with that program, there is a requirement for a local share, and that local share is different for all of the colleges. And the way it's determined is through basically the same formula that the MSDE uses to determine the local share of public assistance dollars for schools in the counties. And so MSDE calculates how much public dollars should go towards schooling in the counties, and that's based on enrollment factors. And then it determines how much the local share of that should be, and that's based on wealth factors in the counties. And the state picks up the rest. And so whatever percentage the state picks up for that program is basically the same as this construction grant program for the community colleges, with a couple of exceptions. One of those exceptions is we have a few community colleges who are regional colleges that are sponsored by more than one county, and by statute those colleges receive 75% state share for this construction grant program. And the other exception is that the minimum state share for this program is 50%. And so as MSDE does the calculations for counties, if that falls below 50% state share, we just adjust those upwards to 50% for our program. So if you turn to page 5 of your booklet, you can see we have listed what the state share percentages are going to be for each of the 15 community colleges. And this holds true for projects that received their initial funding in the FY24 budget cycle. And that percentage will carry through for the life of that project. Even if that project receives funding in additional years, this is the state share that carries forward for that project. You'll note Baltimore City is not included on this list. That's because they're a state agency, and therefore they don't participate in this program. The state pays 100% of their costs. And so after this meeting today, probably I'm going to be sending this information out to the colleges. The reason we do that now is because their request for FY24 funding is due to us in July. And in the meantime, in the months to follow, they have to go out and get local support for their projects in order to submit their request in July. And so they need to have this information now to figure out how much local dollars they need to come up with to support their projects. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that people have.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Schuster. And again, this does not require a vote. It's for information, just for our information. Does anybody have any questions, any comments?
I just got a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Commissioner Srirath, go ahead.
Yeah. So the percentages on the formula, is that based, does that account for like Kerwin and American Rescue Plan monies that are coming in?
I don't believe those are factored into it at all, no.
Okay. And any idea of if they were to be taken into account, would they change the percentages or one way or the other?
No, the percentages are basically based on wealth factors associated with the counties. in their ability to pay, relative to other counties.
And are any of the community colleges HSIs or like Hispanic serving institutions are considered like predominantly minority institutions?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something that I don't know about. I don't know, Secretary Fielder, whether you can comment on it. I don't know whether the community colleges tend to go for that designation. I mean, obviously I know the four-year institutions do, but Secretary Fielder, can you clarify that at all?
What the specific question?
Said, are any of them designated as Hispanic serving institutions or minority serving institutions? And
no, not that I'm aware of.
No, not at the community college level.
yeah, I mean, that's my feeling too. I've not heard of that at the community college level. So
the community colleges, by definition or by practice, are locally based entities. So they're reflective of the localities or the counties or the areas in which they serve. So they're the funding that we give to the community colleges is considered aid to local governments in the state budget. So the primary drivers of what happens with the community colleges is from the local area, local level where they, that they serve.
Right.
So Montgomery College and Prince George's Community College have a lot higher level of, African-American populations, as well as Asian and other, I guess they're designated other race other than white. But each community college in its respective areas the population at the college is reflective of the local area in which they serve.
yeah, and Mr. Newman, that's a good point. I mean, even as one reads through the accountability reports, you get a clear picture of that in terms of the racial mix-up and makeup, the diversity of the institutions that varies very clearly by the makeup of the county. So.
Yes, and then Baltimore City Community College is a state college. It was taken over by the state many, many years ago. So it's not in this cost sharing because it receives its capital funding directly from the state, similar to the public four-year institution.
Mm-hmm.
But, that is an interesting question, and I'm just prompted. We'll research that and see what kind of national guidelines are out there in terms of any designations for specific populations.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Secretary Fielder.
I know, I have family in Idaho, and I know there's like a community college back there, and I think they were working. It might be a four-year college now, but I think they were working hard to try to get HSI status. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah.
No, and I think that you at the federal level, the designations that do happen typically are tied to federal funding. So that would be another source for us to review.
Mm-hmm. Right. So good.
I know the tribal colleges and the colleges serving tribal and the HBCUs. So we'll look into that. That's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one last point. Chuck and echo on this one. When we talked about the DEI committee, we talked a lot about kind of closing that gap from 50 to 55 between Latinos, Blacks, and then to catch up with whites and Asians. And that was one of the things that we talked about, like places like PG County, where you see predominantly minority population, and then you have a community college and try to create a pathway to get folks into that four-year degree. So I think if there's any monies that are out there nationally, federally, that could help this cause, I think it would be great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if I understood the comment, Commissioner Serrano, about the goal of the 55% with degrees, I think you made reference to that, and I think creating the pathway for all who want it to get a four-year degree is what is an important focus, but I believe the goal of 55% is at least an associate's degree, at least 55% with an associate's degree.
Mhm. Okay.
Yes.
Good discussion. Anything else before we move on?
Mhm. Mr. Schuster, I had a question related to a quick read of the performance report that indicates there's been an increase in enrollment at the community college level. Is that true across the board?
Well, generally speaking, especially since COVID, we've seen decreases in enrollments at the community colleges. We're projecting still that the enrollments will increase in the future years. However, in the last few years, we've generally speaking, and it's different for each college individually, but generally speaking, the trends have gone down in the last couple of years.
Yes, Commissioner Boyd, you add a little bit to what Dan was talking about on a national level. The community colleges have decreased a higher percentage or decreased more than the four-year institutions. And graduate enrollment has been the one that's held steady or increased. Part of the reason or the reasoning that is out there is that those at community colleges are there because it's less cost, is less expensive, and are also tied to the part of the workforce that had the gravest impact from the COVID. So loss of jobs, loss of family jobs, loss of transportation or whatever.
Mhm.
And that's impacted the community colleges even more.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I ask a really dumb question? Like, what is the difference between the formula that we're talking about now and the CADE formula? Or are they same? Are they the same?
This is specific to capital projects.
Yeah.
And it's set by statute as to what the parameters of that are. And as I said, they use the MSDE formula as a base, but it's by statute sets a minimum limit, and it sets what it will be for regional colleges at 75% always.
So, Commissioner Serrano, all the institutions, in addition to the four-year publics, participate two ways in support from the state. So one is the institutional support based on the Salinger formula, the CADE formula, and then institutions also come in and participate for grant money. So just like the community colleges have a formula that operates there, there's a certain formula for how much, well, actually it's a designation in the budget as how much will be made available to private independent institutions. Okay, anything else before we move on to Dr. Dow? Okay, then Dr. Dow, you're going to take us through the proposed Comar amendment, and this will require a vote on our part. So let me turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. I'm going to start on our memo in the Commission book. Under Maryland law, religious educational institutions under certain circumstances may operate in Maryland without a certificate of approval from the Commission. To do so, they must apply for that exemption. Regulations set forth the rights of an institution whose application for religious exemption is denied, including the procedures for requesting a hearing regarding that denial. Currently, our regulations do not include a time limit for an institution to request a hearing. Therefore, the enclosed proposed regulatory amendment adds a 20-day deadline. This addition brings religious exemption hearing procedures into alignment with all other appeal procedures for MHEC actions, including denials of approval to operate both private career schools and degree granting institutions. The proposed regulatory amendments have been approved for legality by MHEC's Assistant Attorneys General. As required by the Maryland Administrative Procedure Act, they are enclosed for your review and approval. Upon your approval, proposed regulations and regulatory amendments are submitted to the Legislature's Joint Committee on Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Review, often called AELR, after which they are submitted to the Division of State Documents for publication in the Maryland Register. After a public comment period, they may be brought back before the commission for final adoption. So the recommendation put forward is that it is recommended that the commission approve for publication in the Maryland Register the enclosed proposed regulatory amendments to the procedures for denial of a religious exemption and authorize its assistant attorneys general to make non-substantive edits to the proposed regulations to conform to the stylistic and formatting requirements of AELR and DSD. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Dow. Any questions at all? Or need for clarification on anything?
Is the 20 days, is that consistent with like denials for other things?
Absolutely, exactly. So for our private career schools, we also have a procedure where a private career school can request a hearing, same thing for a degree granting institution. So this just brings our religious exemptions into alignment with that.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? All right, so just to repeat the recommendation, it is recommended that the commission approve for publication in the Maryland Register the enclosed proposed regulatory amendment to the procedures for denial of a religious exemption and authorize its assistant attorneys general to make non-substantive edits to the proposed regulation to conform to the stylistic and formatting requirements of AELR and DSD. So if I could have somebody move that recommendation.
Commissioner Boyd, I so move.
Thank you. And a second?
Commissioner Salinger, second.
Thank you. Any other discussion needed? All in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
And we don't need an actual tally on that vote, do we? Okay, so it's approved and we can move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then the last item on our agenda, at least the last official item, unless there's other business to be covered when we get there, is a report from the Office of Research and Policy Analysis. And Dr. Schmertz, I believe you're going to introduce Dr. Yuxin Lin to present that accountability report. It was a lengthy document that we all received. This is a document prepared annually holding institutions accountable for performance standards. The executive summary was very helpful to have that. But Dr. Schmertz, let me turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and the rest of the commissioners. Good to see you on this fine January day. Indeed, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Lin. Dr. Lin is the Associate Director for Research and Policy Analysis. She is the one who prepared the lengthy report and the helpful executive summary that Commissioner Serkamp referenced. This is an annual report for those of you who have been members of the Commission for a number of years. This is a familiar and regular installment in the material that we bring before you. It is an action item indeed, and I will turn it over. I believe Dr. Lin has a series of slides for her presentation, and we'll leave room for questions. So thank you, Dr. Lin.
Thank you, Dr. Schmertz, for introduction. Thank you, Secretary Fielder, Madam Chair, and the Commissioners. So I'm here to present the 2021 Performance Accountability Report. So I will just share my screen and show you the slides for the summary. I probably need to share the entire screen, sorry. Okay. And also as a reminder, a memo of the report summary is on the page 8 of your booklet. So if you want to refer to that, you can do it. So, the Maryland Higher Education Commission produces a performance accountability to fulfill statutory requirements for accountability on the part of Maryland's public colleges and universities. Each year, Maryland public colleges and universities will submit to the Commission a report on their activities and contributions to the state, particularly on their application of the students. Each institution has a different mission and serves a different array of student and education needs within the state. The report is structured in a manner that allows each institution to identify strategic goals suited to its own mission. So institutions are asked by MHAC to present their progress and barriers to progress in achieving the goals and the strategies set forth in the 2017 to 2021 state plan for post-secondary education, that is, student success with less debt. So this year, the accountability report focuses on the short-term impact of COVID-19 on Maryland public institutions. In an effort to keep my presentation brief and leave time for your questions, we'll briefly explore the findings tied to this focus. And also, to make institutions better describe the challenges and responses they had for the COVID-19. This year, institutions were asked to respond to one of the questions that is related to COVID-19 in their accountability report. These questions will be summarized and discussed in the future slides. So because of the COVID-19 pandemic, institutions faced tremendous challenges in the academic year 2020 to 2021. I will start off by saying the result of full-year colleges and universities, and then follow up by the community college. So you can find more detailed summary of the findings on the page 3 to 4 of the full report. In summary, 7 out of 3 full-year institutions documented enrollment declines. So the declines was mostly attributed to the reductions in the undergraduate enrollment. So in terms of the student ratio and ethnic composition, institutions reported the proportion of the minority enrollment stayed steady in the year 2020 to 2021. So that means the enrollment reduction does not disproportionately occur to students of color. So the revenue losses and expenses increases caused by the pandemic has a significant impact on institutions, particularly auxiliary services. However, all institutions committed to stabilize the tuition and fees level. The data from MHAC Data Book 2021 shows that the average tuition and fees of fall 2021 was almost the same to the level in fall 2020. Since it's only 1 year after COVID-19 begins, it's not easy to determine the long-term effect of COVID-19, such as the effect on retention rate or 6-year graduation rate. But for the institution who measured such retention rate and graduation rate in the report, 5 institutions reported a decline in either second-year retention rate or 6-year graduation rate. But again, considering the lack of the long-term influence taking effect, it is still too early to call these metrics reflect the true long-term effect of COVID-19. So turning to the community colleges, they experienced a much wider enrollment reduction. 15 out of 16 schools documented enrollment decline. The reduction in Maryland community college enrollment is part of a longer declining trend that can be traced back to the 2011 to 2012 academic year. In general, we see the enrollment reduction is observed in almost all types of students, including full-time, part-time, degree-seeking, and non-degree seeking. One exception is the high school student enrollment, or it is as known as dual credit or dual enrollment. As many community colleges now build the partnership with their local high schools student enrollment kept increasing last year. Another positive finding is that also the enrollment declines, the share of the minority enrollments increased slightly, meaning the decline of the minority students is in a smaller magnitude. Also, community college in Maryland kept maintaining the affordability of their education. According to the institution summation and MHAC data book, the tuition of community colleges in fall 2021 increased by only 1%. In addition, for many years, community colleges have been applying multiple measures assessment tools to determine student and remedial education needs, which means the institutions do not need only one test score to place a student in college level courses or remedial courses. it is largely decreased the number of students who were put into remedial education unnecessarily before. So this year, community colleges report the proportion of the students who assessed need the remedial education continue decreasing. So in terms of the student success, many community colleges observed retention rate decline last year. The numbers in graduation rates is mixed, so you can read the more detailed finding on the community college on page 4 to 5 in the full report. So in this reporting cycle, institutions were also required to respond to one of the 3 following questions that is related to COVID-19. I will summarize the major response in the next few slides. So the first question is, please specify how your institution utilized the CARES funding over the past year. The CARES funding is a federal funding that the full name is Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act that was passed by House in 2020. So what are some ways your institution was able to leverage this federal funding for student access and success? So most of the institutions stated that they primarily use the CARES funding by providing the direct federal financial aid via CARF or Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. Besides that, some other usage like they implement COVID-19 tests frequently, they purchase equipment, resources, technology support for online education, and also the funding was used to provide necessary support and training from faculty to redesign the course syllabus. And finally, they mentioned they can use the funding to purchase other health and public safety supplies and services. And the second question is, what are 3 of the biggest challenges your institutions faced due to COVID pandemic? So most of the institutions described the biggest challenge was caused by the enrollment reduction they experienced during COVID-19. And other challenges they listed like pivoting from the traditional instruction model to a solely online model in a very short term is another type of challenge. And also COVID-19 public safety regulations impose additional administrative burdens to institutions because they need staff to navigate COVID-19 regulations, best practice, and documentations. And like us, institutions also need to move staff from working on campus to teleworking. And also some other challenges include supporting students who have the mental health support and also need to conduct COVID-19 test protocols frequently. So the third question is, what are 3 COVID-related initiatives and programs your institution implemented and plan to adopt permanently? So one big answer is, so a lot of institutions now consider distance teaching and learning as an important part in their future plan. And the second big answer is a test optional admission. So due to COVID-19, a number of high school students have trouble to take standardized tests like ACT or SAT due to the closure of the test center or other sites, and they have limited access to the resources to take the test. So some institutions suspended the requirement for the test score temporarily last year. But at least from the report, one institution stated that they will no longer ask the students to submit test score in application. Some other initiatives and programs taken by the institutions include new virtual advising tools, remote proctoring tools for exams and testing, long-term telework policies, and also one institution mentioned they recently launched online summer orientation for upcoming students. So in summary, institutions are on the track to meet Maryland's degree attainment goal. That is, by 2025, 55% of the Marylanders will have attained at least one associate degree, but the progress might be slowed down by COVID-19 shock. Other thing is, the longer-term impact is still unknown, but MHEC will continue to partner with institutions to closely monitor key trends, such as enrollment, retention, as well as the progress to the 55% completion goal. So looking forward, the The return to in-person instructions as well as improved distance learning delivery has allowed institutions to return some level of normalcy. A positive sign in fall 2021 is that four-year public institutions are seeing an uptick in their first-time full-time enrollment. That suggests more freshmen return to campus as the school return to normal activities. So in conclusion, it is recommended that the Maryland Higher Education Commission approve the 2021 Performance Accountability Report and ask the Secretary to forward it to the Governor and the General Assembly as required by law. So that is the end of my presentation. And please leave your questions and let me know if you have more comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lin. A very helpful summary. I would just add, in conversation with some presidents most recently, they all also talked about learning that we can be a lot more nimble and react much more quickly in higher ed than people ever thought possible. So that was a good lesson for everyone. Any questions or comments?
Sir, this is, I guess it's not really a question. I'm just kind of an observation. It seems like we've seen an erosion in enrollment from like community colleges and four-year colleges during this COVID period, but like I guess it just feels almost that it's kind of, we will make changes now because this is a temporary thing. Is there anybody talking about a long-term plan of like maybe changing policies on telework for faculty or changing policies on student enrollment, having some long-term vision of what this could be to address because I think we're thinking about it as a temporary erosion of enrollment, but if it is an actual pattern, a long-term pattern, it should be something I think we should all be concerned about, that this is like a trend that we have to fight against, because we're trying to get that 55 benchmark. Then 55% benchmark is going to be tough to do that if we're looking at this as like kind of a temporary erosion. I guess that's just an observation. I don't know if it's really a question, but
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. Definitely the trend we observe, especially for the community colleges, is kind of like a part of a long time downturn trend. And so there are definitely some like long-term initiatives they mentioned, like they want to try to attract the students and attract the local students, especially attract the local high school students to come to a community college to take courses and get some taste of the higher education. But basically, because each of the institutions have different, very unique challenges they need to solve by themselves. So basically, we MHAC research office is just considering to take some more survey and other kind of research tools to collect some information. For example, like if universities are going to use test optional admission policy forever or just for temporary time, and some other issues. And also we're trying to still closely monitor the enrollment decline trend, especially for community colleges. We know like nationally this decline trend is shared by all of the community colleges. And so we still like want to follow up the the research and other studies that can explain why we saw this downward trend, and also when we can just say this downward trend will stop in the future. So we will definitely let you know more in the future if we know more information on that. And Dr. Dahl, do you have a question?
Sure. I just wanted to add, I think part of the challenges that campuses are facing right now is they are leaning so heavily on being flexible with their instructional delivery for health precautions. That's their primary tug right now, both at the faculty level and at the student level. And I think students may be averse to having that kind of flexibility, starting a course, not knowing if at some point it is going to have to go online and what that means to learn online, what that means to be assessed online. And if they haven't had that kind of experience, or if they've had a negative experience in the past with that, it kind of makes them think, well, let me not continue my enrollment. Let me give it another semester or two and wait to see how things settle out. So that's one element that I think is a bit of an immediate tug right now that the campuses are facing when they're trying to make accommodations again, in the context of health and safety, not requiring students to necessarily come to the classroom if they've been exposed, and providing alternative ways to access educational resources, it changes how students are engaging with campuses. And I think that's just a reality. I do think some of it, we are still just very much in the midst of it. And we won't start to see the dust settle on this for another semester or two to get back into what is normal or standard practices and procedures. If we had when we talked to the campuses back in October and we started talking about their spring operations, it was like, okay, we think we've got this, we think we know what we're up against, we have policies in place. And then Omicron came and has blown up over the December, January months. So a lot of campuses are every week are kind of changing how they're gonna start the spring semester. Now that they've started the spring semester, they're making changes with students arriving. So it feels still very much every week or every month is shifting. So it's hard to predict what's gonna be permanent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Dow. Secretary Fielder, did you have a comment? Did I lose Secretary Fielder?
As we know, every institution in the United States has faced increased costs due to COVID at the same time of decreased revenue. I think that's going to be a very much stronger long-term drive in terms of how to reduce expenditures on campus through different delivery mechanisms and ways to deliver the class instruction. So I think that's part of it. Right now, because of the federal government's heavy funding, there's money that's being used to fill these gaps from professional development through technology, through everything, but it's not going to be there forever. And when that stops, what institutions have prepared and haven't dried up all their endowment? What are the institutions that are prepared to make the appropriate long-term adjustment to revenue stream decrease and increase expenditures? So I think those are going to be a bigger driver also. We're seeing the questions. Just one other thing, we're seeing some of the questions that are coming through from parents. How come the tuition was not decreased when we paid for our children to be on campus, in the dorms, in the stadiums, having all these other accoutrements that come with higher education, and now everything is being delivered online? In fact, I got one referral today from the governor's office on the same question. Why is not the tuition being reduced across the board? So this hasn't sorted out yet.
Yeah. And people don't have a full understanding of the expense factor of how education is having to be delivered now. But, and I just want to emphasize the other point that you made, Secretary Fielder. All of us who are still very involved with colleges and universities know that next fiscal year is going to be a very challenging one for institutions because that federal money is gone at that point. The extra federal money. Commissioner McDaniels, you had your hand up, and then Commissioner Coleman, you're next after that.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to comment that I noticed in the presentation that some institutions were using the CARES money to address mental health issues. And I know some of the isolation and that's been caused by the virus has been challenging from a mental health standpoint. And then Dr. Dow was saying institutions are also becoming more flexible to be able to switch to this remote thing. And some of these things seem to be in conflict with each other. As we move toward the remote learning, it can also drive something else in a negative manner. So it is a pretty complicated situation, at least from my vantage point.
It clearly has had mental health implications for our students. That's right. Commissioner Coleman?
Yes, I noticed that remedial courses in the community college has decreased. Do you think that's the reason for that, the rationale behind that, or what Dr. Dow is saying and Commissioner McDaniel, also Dr. Fielder? You think those are some of the problems that the workforce, students at that level does not do well a lot of times doing virtual online type courses? Do you think those are the reason why?
is the question about what has led to the decrease in remedial?
Remedial courses on the community college level. I noticed that they have decreased.
Right. Dr. Dow?
Sure, and I certainly would defer to Dr. Lin and Dr. Schmertz on a response, but I think the quick answer is the community colleges are getting, I don't want to say better, but they are improving how they're assessing to need remediation in a way that identifies students in different ways, which may have a repercussion that it decreases need to remediate. So what the community colleges have adopted multiple measures. So they're no longer relying on one single test score to say a student is not ready for college level coursework. They're looking at a multitude of assessments, which may or may not include a standardized test, an SAT or a GPA requirement, or performance on an institutional exam. And that, I would imagine, is helping better identify students who do or do not need remediation, as opposed to a single performance score. Dr. Lin, Dr. Schwartz, do you have anything to add to that?
Dr. Schmertz?
Yes, I want to add to that. Dr. Dow is correct that in part, the move to the multiple measures and the research supports this is a much better kind of point in the arrow of really narrowing down to the students that need the intervention. I think coupled with that is a semantics and sort of definition challenge, which is that a lot of colleges have moved to a credit model where even the interventionist remedial course is a credit bearing class. And so some institutions are not considering that a remedial, understandably, a remedial class. It's an exciting new move to kind of hybridize the remedial that we might have thought of non-credit, rather basic, can slow a student. And it's instead a model that's actually credit bearing. You leave the class with the 3 credits in math, but there's been this infrastructure of additional support that maybe your classmate or your peer who started college at the same time as you didn't need. But the idea is that by the end of that course, you're both at the same place. You are able to move on. And so the other piece of that is that the way in which the course is delivered allows for a shrinking of that pool as well, because students are now taking a credit-bearing class. They're able to keep momentum. It's kind of a win-win. So that's the other piece of that I think is shrinking the pool.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anything else?
Dr. Lin, I was concerned about the questions that are being advanced for students and faculty and institutions to respond to. Like, it strikes me that teaching in person is very different from online. And there are a lot of people who are professors who have difficulty teaching in person and are disaster when it comes to being online. So I'm not so sure that the questions are really looking at the kind of issues that Dr. Fielder raised earlier, like why are students coming to college? And once you have this situation that we now have, what are they missing? And are those factors that would lead to them deciding not to be a part of what's going on in these institutions at this point in time? So I have some concerns about what are the questions that people are being asked to respond to.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Boyd, for your question. So that's a great question. So basically, almost all institutions mention this online teaching mode is something like they have to do during COVID-19, and they're really looking forward to return to their normal teaching style, that is teaching in person. And especially in some community colleges, online teaching is for some programs and certificates, credentials, especially the credentials that need some like practice and training apprenticeship. So basically those are still beholding on in person, even in the COVID-19 era. And also basically a lot of institutions mentioned starting from 2021, they start to reopen their classroom for students and try to resume some of the normal level of in-person teaching mode. And but definitely, yeah. So this will remain to a question mark. So whether or not some institutions still want to maintain some online education, is that a good thing for students or not? So we will. So there are definitely a lot of research right now just trying to indicate whether or not online education is a good thing. There are some evidence shows it can be a good thing if you have very good design and you have very responsible instructor and you have the students who are really motivated. But there are definitely other evidence showing like if the online courses are poorly designed and the students are not taking it seriously, basically online education will decrease the students' outcomes in the future. So those are the information I know at this moment. And hopefully I think next year we will see more about when those institutions move from like mostly online mode to the mostly in-person mode next year. So we probably can tell you more about should we just continue this online mode in the future, or we should just like don't believe that.
It's sort of like it would be helpful if we could look at some questions that look at the retention of information from level to level.
Okay. Thank you.
Because it'd be very disastrous if institutions find out, guess what? The learning really didn't take place, and you're trying to move people on to higher levels, but they don't have the foundation. And then, of course, the last piece would be students going into employment, where it turns out that employers find out they're not equipped to do the kinds of things that their former bachelor students or master students or community college students were able to do. So I do think looking at the questions that we're asking will help institutions to make some decisions about what is the best way forward. And as Dr. Fielder says, if the money disappears, that might answer some of those questions. I don't know. Sort of like, what can they afford? I think these are very troubling times, and your research could be critical in terms of trying to answer some of these not so pleasant questions. But the reality is we need to know, what do they learn?
Thank you, Commissioner Boyd. Dr. Schmerz, did you want to add to that?
No, when Commissioner Boyd summarized her concerns, I got my question answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else before we take a vote on approving this report? Then could I have a motion to approve the accountability report that was just presented to us?
I make a motion that we.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. Could I have a second?
I'll second.
Who was that?
Commissioner Burrow.
Thank you, Commissioner Burrow. Any other comments before we take a vote on this? All in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed, abstaining? Okay, we're good. It's passed. So that concludes our formal agenda. Does anybody have any additional business to raise?
I have a follow-up.
Okay.
I just wanted to let you know that both Montgomery College and Prince George's Community College are designated as MSIs. Montgomery College is designated as Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institution, and Prince George's Community College is designated as a predominantly Black institution.
Okay.
That's from the U.S. Department of Education. That was some quick research, so I'll do a little better research and see if any have been added in recent years.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. That's very helpful. You know, it might be helpful for us to know overall in the system which institutions carry designations like that. If that would be possible to gather that information, it would be helpful.
Sure, I have the list right here.
Okay, terrific. Okay, then I will entertain a motion to, I think that I was just looking at what was in the chat. I think we're good. Yep, and so I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Thank you, Commissioner Serrano and Commissioner Coleman. I'll take that as a second. And we are adjourned. Thank you all for a great discussion today. Great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all. Be safe.
Stay warm.
Yeah, be
Yeah,
warm
that'll be
too.
hard. Bye.